Let's get back to the Evan Miller Report on SHR Media and Pundit Press Radio.
And welcome back to the Evan Miller Report. I'm Jason Miller. More with our guest in just a moment on the UK general elections. But first, a breakdown of the elections of what has happened in the past 24 hours in the UK with an extended report tonight from the BBC's James Landell.
They're scenes we were told not to expect for weeks. A short journey that would be taken only after days of negotiations. But instead, David Cameron and his wife travelled to Buckingham Palace today to tell the Queen that he would, after all, be staying on as her Prime Minister. But unlike 5 years ago, he returned to Downing Street not as the leader of a coalition, but the master of his own house.
I've just been to see Her Majesty the Queen, and I will now form a majority Conservative government.
And after an election that strained the ties that bind Scotland and England, the Prime Minister promised to govern as a party of one nation, one United Kingdom.
I have always believed in governing with respect. That's why in the last Parliament we devolved power to Scotland and Wales and gave the people of Scotland a referendum on whether to stay inside the United Kingdom. In this Parliament, I will stay true to my word and implement as fast as I can the devolution that all parties agreed for Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland.
His defeated opponent also went on a journey, also with his wife, but they went to Labour headquarters to thank his party for the hard work that in the end had not paid off. The responsibility, Ed Miliband said, was his alone.
And now it's time for someone else to take forward the leadership of this party. So I'm tendering my resignation.
It was not the speech they'd wanted to hear. It was not the speech he'd wanted to give.
I am truly sorry I did not succeed. I've done my best for nearly 5 years. Now you need to show your responsibility. Your responsibility, not simply to mourn our defeat, but to pick yourself up and continue the fight. We've come back before, and this party will come back again.
But will his party come back again too? Nick Clegg's Lib Dems suffered devastating losses with just 8 MPs remaining in Parliament. And
for that, of course, I must take responsibility, and therefore I announce that I will be resigning as leader of the Liberal Democrats.
History, he said, would judge the Lib Dems more kindly than the voters, who'd inflicted what he called a crushing and unkind blow on the party. But that was little comfort for his supporters.
Fear and grievance have won. Liberalism has lost. But it is more precious than ever, and we must keep fighting for it. This is a very dark hour for our party, but we cannot and will not allow decent liberal values to be extinguished overnight. Our party will come back. Our party will win again.
The party that won last year's European elections today won millions of votes and came second in many seats in the north of England. But tonight, UKIP has just one MP, and it's not him. Nigel Farage had promised to resign if he didn't win Thanet South, so...
But I'm a man of my word. I don't break my word, so I should be writing to the UK UKIP National Executive in a few minutes, saying that I am standing down as leader of UKIP.
Although inevitably, he didn't rule out standing again one day. The night had begun with a shock.
Here it is, 10 o'clock, and we are saying the Conservatives are the largest party.
Few could believe it.
If this exit poll is right, Andrew, I will publicly eat my hat on your programme.
But as the night wore on, it became clear the exit poll was right. The Conservatives were taking seats from the Lib Dems and holding off Labour, the first party of government to increase its seats and votes for years. No wonder the Chancellor was smiling. The Tories succeeded in part because Labour did not, failing to make gains in key marginal seats across England, and elsewhere even losing seats, including that held by the Shadow Chancellor.
Any personal disappointment I have at this result is as nothing compared to the sense of sorrow I have at the result that Labour has achieved across the United Kingdom.
But Labour's worst losses were in Scotland, where the party was all but wiped out, with just one MP now representing what was once Labour's heartland. So out went the party leader in Scotland, Jim Murphy, and the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Douglas Alexander. And it was her party that had caused all the damage. The Scottish National Party almost swept the board, winning 56 MPs in an unstoppable landslide.
The Scottish lion has roared this morning across the country.
The Nationalists took seats not just from Labour but also the Lib Dems, who suffered huge losses south of the border, a party punished for joining the coalition and not living up to all its promises. A party that lost most of its big names: Vince Cable, Danny Alexander, Simon Hughes and Charles Kennedy, all ousted from Parliament. It was a day that defied the polls and surprised the media, a day that transformed the political map of Britain. So after all the talk of hung parliaments and coalitions and deals, tonight, once again, we have a government run by one party. And for the first time, David Cameron is in Downing Street with a real mandate to do what he wants. The only question is how much he's constrained by the smallness of his majority. For now, Ed Miliband and Nick Clegg had one last duty: to lay a wreath at the cenotaph to mark VE Day. They had hoped to be in government, but it was not to be, for they lost, and David Cameron won what he called the sweetest victory of all. James Landell, BBC News, Westminster.
And many thanks to James Landell for the latest on the UK elections, and we'll have more on VE Day later on in the broadcast here on the Evan Miller Report. All right, folks. Well, right now, joining us now from our Sacramento studios is Orlean Koehle. She is our SHR Media Global Affairs correspondent. Andrew Lowe is with us as well. He was with us on last night's election coverage and joins us back now. And, of course, Corey Evans is with us as well to help us break down these UK elections. Andrew, I'd like to start off with you tonight. My goodness, we were expecting the Conservatives to win last night, but I wasn't expecting them to win this big.
That is correct. You know, we talked about them needing some other parties to help them tip that balance of power in their favour, and while they just brought it home over the threshold all by themselves.
I know, it's surprising to me. Why do you think the...
It's definitely what us Americans would call a grand slam. Sorry.
Yeah, certainly right, Corey. Andrew, why do you think the Conservatives won out so big? What did Labour do so wrong?
Well, it sounds really like there was good turnout. The base really, I think, have spoken and said that they support the austerity and the more conservative fiscal policy of the Tories. That's really what it looks like to me.
Also, if I could add something, Jason.
Sure.
From my research, Nick Clegg, who was the head of the Labour or the Liberal Democrats, they really lost big. And
yes.
Back in 2010, they had done really quite well. In fact, they called it Cleggomania. But they had promised all of these huge promises, one of which was they were going to abolish the student tuition fees. And that didn't happen at all. In fact, the student tuition fees tripled. So that's why many people were not trusting him and not trusting the Liberal Democrats. So they went from 57
There's
seats
already
in
been
2010.
quite a few resignations as well.
They went from 57 seats in 2010 down to just 8 seats. So they really lost big time. And I think, as Andrew said, there was just a feeling of not trusting the Liberals and having more trust in the Conservative platform and what those promises were.
Eventually, lies catch up to them. That's what it all boils down to. That
yes, certainly right on that. And Orlean, you were right on the button with the Liberal Democrats. Made a promise they couldn't keep, and the voters, they remember what you promised them. And, I think people in the UK, they realized David Cameron couldn't do everything he promised because he had that coalition government in charge. Now that he has his own majority government in charge, Orlean, it now gives him a little bit more room to give the rest of his promises that he promised during the first election back in 2010 when he was running against Gordon Brown, then the Labour Prime Minister.
That's right. And one of those promises that I'm hoping he will keep is he's going to have a referendum to let the British vote if they want to still stay part of the European Union. And I think so many of them are disgusted with the European Union, and maybe they will vote it out.
That would be awesome.
It certainly would. Andrew, your take on when David Cameron will do this? Do you think that the British people will come behind him and vote the UK out of the EU completely?
Well, that's a really tough question because at the end of the day, there are a lot of people out there that feel Europe is a really good thing. It's the way forward. It's the new merging of Europe that is the way to health, wealth, and prosperity. I, of course, don't buy into that, and there's many like me back home who don't buy it. But it will certainly be a tight margin on that vote, I would imagine.
In my book that I wrote by Stealth and Deception, Andrew, I have quite a few pages about the election that went on in Ireland to bring them into being a member of the European Union. And according to everything I had researched and reports I received, it was really a fraudulent vote. They totally changed the way that they collected the ballots, and many people thought that was just an absolute fraud, that whole election. Have you heard that as well?
Well, I haven't really, that was probably before I really woke up and started getting interested and involved in the political issues. That probably happened when I was still asleep and ignorant to the whole thing.
Well, I'll have to give you a copy of my book so you can read that. I think there was so much fraud going on just from some of the reports that so many of the people in Ireland were reporting. They were determined to get them into the EU. The first election they had, the Ireland people, the Irish, had said no. So the second election Sorry, I'm not from Ireland, though I do have Irish blood in me somewhere. Anyway, the second election, they decided they had to pull all sorts of shenanigans, and I believe that is exactly what happened. So they did end up being members of the EU, and I think a lot of their disgruntled Irish as well as lots of British who would like to pull out.
Yeah. Well, I definitely remember whenever they got into the Euro and we used to be able to go down, and a pint of Guinness would only have been maybe about 2 Irish punts, 2 Irish pounds, and pretty much overnight a pint went from that to being about €5. It was a real shock.
Well, I also write in my book what happened to the Germans when they had to enter in and have the euro. My husband has relatives in Germany and Austria, and they said that their whole pension that they had saved for retirement was suddenly gone. So it did devalue the German mark, and for them to think that this was the same equivalent, it wasn't. And I think a lot of people have suffered because of that.
And another thing I have to know with all these environmental regulations that we hear so much of today, one that I noted from the BBC's Top Gear program when they did their 100-pound car challenge is that before the EU came in, they actually had pretty much the same sort of thing that you've got in the U.S., where when your car was pretty much old and ruined, you could take it to the scrapyard and you get 20 quid or whatever it was, and you're done with it. But when the EU stepped in and said that you have to recycle completely all the bits of the car, or as much as possible, I heard from them you had to actually take it to the scrapyard and pay them 100 quid or whatever it was to take it off your hands. Their words, not mine.
Wow. Oh, yeah. And, with the fisheries in Northern Ireland, where I'm from, have been screaming from the rooftops for a long time about the European regulations where we can't even fish our own waters. The quotas are so stringent that the Ulster fishermen can't make their living, and yet the Spanish and Portuguese can come over and fish our waters and have different quotas, and it's just an absolute mess,
It's corruption at its finest, really. When you think about it there. Well, I'd like to talk about more how this affects the European Union in just a moment, folks. But first, two things that struck me in this election. We were expecting big things out of the UKIP party, the UK Independence Party. Andrew, UKIP suffered big time last night. They, matter of fact, lost seats, not gained seats.
Yeah, and it's just disappointing because they still got almost 3 million votes, which is double the amount of votes the Scottish National Party got, yet the SNP managed to get 56 seats for their lower tally of votes. So I'm sure it's frustrating for the UKIP party. I don't really know what the answer is.
Do you think UKIP's going to have a comeback in what we would call midterm elections coming around in the UK? Do you think they have a comeback?
Well, they have a very strong, passionate base that are anti-Europe, and that's really where they started. They got their start with Nigel Farage in the European Parliament. So I would imagine that will still be around. It'll be interesting to see who rises as their new leader, and can they bring more followers into the party.
And I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Orlean,
Jason, according to my information, they actually had bigger gains this election than in 2010. They had 12.6%, and last election they only had 3.1%. But for some reason, I guess it didn't win them. They only have one seat in Parliament. I'm not quite sure how that all works out, but they are making strides. It's just not showing. I think it's because those votes were spread out so far. And if they had been all in one certain district, then maybe they could have gained more seats.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, Orlean. It's just they have a wide base all over the country, yet not densely enough together where they can bring one of their candidates to the podium in first place.
And no offense to Nigel Farage, I like him as a candidate. I wish we had a candidate more like him here in the United States. But I think he was probably a little too brash, probably for most UK voters. They were probably thinking some thought of him. Who's this U.S. Yankee impersonating being a UK politician over here? We don't like this kind of person. He's a little too much for us.
Well, is he the one that will gain the one seat, do you think?
No. He apparently lost, and he did resign his position today.
Oh, that's too bad. I really liked him as well.
I certainly do as well. Do you think Nigel Farage will have a future within the UKIP party, and his political future is still looking good there, Andrew?
Well, the flip side, the argument that's always presented against UKIP is that they're a narrow-minded bunch of racists because they believe in having borders and strict immigration policy. So there's the broad support is there at the base. You have the English patriots that believe in what they're talking about. Having said that, the media love to paint them as a extremist, hard right, National Front racist group, I think that's probably what hurt them with a number of the sort of middle of the road voters.
Well, and you think if the UK does have this referendum on the EU, this may help UKIP in the next election, because obviously David Cameron has came out and said he is not running again for a third term, so that means that the Conservatives, and it is being rumored that the Conservatives may throw the current mayor, who did get reelected last night as well, in London, Boris Johnson, and Orlean. I heard from Kel Fritz, our correspondent up in Canada, last night when we were doing our election coverage. Boris is not too well liked amongst Conservatives. They think he's a very big moderate.
Interesting. I'll have to do research on him and follow him.
Well,
there's
will
just
see what
so
happens.
many layers to this, isn't there?
Yeah,
Yes.
there certainly
Oh,
is
yeah.
now. Now, another big part of this election, and you hinted to this, Andrew, is the very surprising win of the Scottish National Party. They defeated Labour big time over in Scotland last night, leaving only one Labour seat, one Tory seat, and one Lib Dem seat. Take us behind that, if you can, on how that even happened.
Well, that is interesting, and I have a very close friend who lives in the north of Scotland, and I haven't been able to speak with them about this. However, it is surprising after they rejected the independence, and yet here we are only a couple of months later, and it's been an overwhelming victory for the Scottish National Party. So,
Yes, they got 56 of 59 seats. That is amazing, isn't it?
Yep, really
It
amazing.
It is, and Nicola Sturgeon, the new SNP leader of her party now over in Scotland, has now promised that there is going to be another referendum and that they would leave the UK if the Tory government and the likes of David Cameron came back as Prime Minister, and they would leave the UK and join the likes of the EU. Orlean, you've written Stealth and Deception. What do you think about the possibility of Scotland trying to remove themselves from the UK once again? They tried it once. They did not succeed. Do you think they will have a chance this time?
I hope they'll do more research on just what the European Union offers them, which is really nothing. It's very interesting, but I understand that they are kind of more of a big welfare state than the rest of the UK. Is that correct, Andrew?
Yeah, they're very big into their welfare state up there.
So they probably think the European Union will take care of them, and that's maybe why they're thinking.
Where does the welfare state thing sound so familiar? Oh, yeah, that's right. The U.S. has a problem as well. So I think I've got an idea of what's going on over there.
Yes, we are becoming more welfare all the time. That's very sad.
Well, you don't know the half of it here yet. I mean, we have really a huge amount of money that gets shelled out for this cradle-to-grave welfare back home in Britain. So it's been popularized by the media, and you know, it's really something that you are going to see more of here if the pendulum continues to swing the way it is.
Well, another issue that was agreed on by most of the parties, with the exception of, I think, UKIP over in the UK, Andrew, was the NHS. And the only issue that at least Labour and the Tories had when it came to the NHS was the funding of the NHS. And that was talked about a lot in the election. How much does that NHS cost the UK government and the British people each year to run? And how long will the UK be able to keep running with that NHS?
You know, I had these numbers when I last gave a speech in November about this, and I can't remember them off the top of my head, but it's a vast amount of money, something around 17 or 19 to 23% of the GDP. that gets spent on healthcare, and it's really just out of control over there. The hospital, because you can go to the hospital and you get seen for free, and you go supposedly free, and you go home, you got no bill to pay because it's taken care of by the taxpayer. And so you really have the moral hazard there of just going to the doctor for any little thing with no skin in the game. Now, there was an interesting article that came out probably 3, maybe 4 months ago from one of the leading administrators of the National Health Service, and his research was basically saying that it's completely unsustainable. It is looking at collapse within the next couple of years unless there's major reform and they start charging for a minimal amount for prescriptions and for doctor visits. And I know that won't be popular for people at home. We will just have to wait and see.
No wonder Jay was so disgusted with the NHS Act that came up during the opening show at the 2012 London Olympics.
Yeah, I was not very impressed by the likes of that. And of course, Obamacare here, Andrew, as you know, was popular. So
it's absolutely no better.
Here in the UK seems to be reflecting here in the US. We're only getting started on what you guys have, I think, been putting up with for at least the last 3 decades.
Oh yeah, look, it's a mess. A lot of my friends at home are professionals from the dental industry, from our profession rather, the optometrists and even medical doctors, and it's just rife with waste, fraud, and abuse. That's really what it comes down to. There's no way to police it because there's such vast numbers. And you even get, in some communities, you even get experts at gaming the system where within their communities people will come to this expert who knows the paperwork inside out and can help them complete the paperwork to then be eligible for the maximum amount of benefits. And it's just that, it gets totally out of control.
Now, David Cameron has suggested, or he's been accused by the likes of former Labour leader, I have to get used to calling him former Labour leader, Ed Miliband. During the election of trying to privatize the NHS. Can the NHS be privatized, Andrew? Can it be fixed that way, or does it just need to be tossed aside completely, or is it too late? The UK is just so webbed with this NHS now, they can't really get out of this at this point.
Well, I would say that any introduction of the free market to that system is only going to drive costs down. It's only going to be a good thing to bring more choice, competition, and lower pricing. Of course, that's a very typical argument of the left, that you're privatizing it, and so it's going to be the big bad corporations out to make their money. The reality is it needs to happen. That the system can't continue to lose money every year, and I would be for a very open and free market approach to healthcare. I think that's definitely going to be an advantage to the patient at the end of the day.
The private markets are the only ones that can actually figure out how to do things cheaper as far as healthcare goes.
Exactly. Now, at home, that mindset is a long way from being the commonplace train of thought. The idea of having to pay for your health services is just frightening to the people at home. They feel that it's something that should be taken care of collectively, and that having a bill for your medical procedures, that is just so foreign. There's a long road to travel in educating them and getting over that bridge.
Now, Andrew, David Cameron has already went to the Queen of England. Obviously, for the folks who don't know, the UK still does have a monarchy amongst them. And usually the rules, if I know it correctly, is when a government is supposed to be established, the Prime Minister goes to the Queen and says, we would like to start a government. He doesn't have to start a coalition this time, obviously, because he has enough seats. He needed 326. He got 331. And so he went to the Queen, obviously, early this morning, as James Landell related in his report from the BBC. And he has formed that government. What do you expect him to first work on with his new majority government?
Well, first of all, I think it's interesting that in this day and age, they still have to go to the Queen and ask for permission to start the government. Isn't that a very fascinating concept? I kind of find it funny now that I'm here in America.
It shows that the British love their formality and staying with tradition. It's not that, she's nothing more than a figurehead, but it's interesting how they still go through these same rituals that they've been doing for hundreds of years.
Yeah, and Kel Fritz reported last night, during our broadcast last night, she said if God forbid, last night, if it became a hung parliament and they would not be able to get a government formulated, Orlean, I found it interesting. Kel told me that the Queen can still take charge in certain situations, and that if the Prime Minister could not form a government between David Cameron or even Ed Miliband, if he became the minority Prime Minister and the government couldn't be formed together and they had to have a new election in July, the Queen could technically take charge of the country until that new election is over.
That's interesting. I did not know that. According to what I read, on May 27th...
But her age, it could be quite complicated.
Yes, on May 27th, she is to then give a speech at Westminster, and her speech will outline the new government agenda and the basis for the first formal vote of the new parliament. So she still has influence in the very beginning of this new parliament. So that's interesting as well.
All right. Well, we have much more to talk about, I'm sure, on these UK elections. Final thoughts from you, Orlean and Andrew. First, Andrew, I'd like to start with you. Final thought on these UK elections.
Well, overall, I think it's going to be good, really, for Britain. Certainly, the Conservatives are going to try and rein in the spending. They're going to try and make those tough choices that nobody really wants to have to go through, but they understand that it's got to be done. It looks like the voters agreed with that idea. So I think overall it's a good step to keep stability in the country.
And what I believe is that this will be good as well, especially if David Cameron can keep his promises and there can be a referendum, so the British will have the opportunity to eventually to get out of the EU, and that would make a big difference. I also hope
that would be really exciting.
I hope that they can do something with the enormous Islam problem that they are now having in England. I heard about all these over 100 girls that were kidnapped and forced into prostitution. So they have an enormous problem with all the Muslims coming in, and maybe David Cameron can do something to rein that in as well.
Definitely hope that weighs in on their minds the next time that anyone there goes out for a curry.
Curry. A funny thing to be talking about after a UK election is a curry, and honest to say, I may know a lot about British politics, Andrew, but I don't have the faintest idea what a curry is.
Well, I can tell you, it wouldn't take you too long when you get to England to figure out what a curry is.
You know, my brother lives.
They love
in
their
London,
Indian cuisine, Jay.
yeah. So he lives in London, and one of the first things that he likes to do when I come to visit is go to one of the local pubs, and they quite often serve curry and a pint for 10 quid, and I can tell you it goes down all right.
Wow. Andrew, with this new conservative government, obviously not right away, but in the next couple of years, would you consider revisiting the UK to see how the UK is doing today? Or is it much better just to stay here on the other side of the pond, as they like to call it?
Well, for the foreseeable future, I'm happy here. Such is the environment at home that there's just not the opportunity that I'm enjoying here, and so I'm not going to rush back. Let's put it that way.
That's good, because we love having you here, Andrew. Andrew is such a great speaker for telling us what life was like under total socialism when he lived in Ireland. So we love having you here.
I think the freedom is wearing off on him, Orlean. That's probably what it is.
I think you're right.
All right.
I appreciate that.
Yes, we appreciate you coming over here and giving us your analysis and being on the air.
Yes,
with
you're
us
good influence, man.
Today and yesterday. Orlean Koehle, SHR Media's Global Affairs correspondent, and Andrew Lowe, former Irish, I wouldn't say former Irish citizen, but I would say he used to live in Ireland and now lives here in the U.S. Thank you very much for being with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and take a short break here on the Evan Miller Report. When we come back, Corey Evan has tonight's business report. We'll be right back after these messages.